Hello, my name is Andy O'Neill, and thanks for watching Weblytica TV. I'm joined today by my friend Alex Sirota. Alex is a pioneer in using the cloud to meet the needs of small and medium-sized businesses and membership-based organizations. He has a Bachelors of Science degree in computer science from the University of Michigan and has worked as a product manager at 2 internet startups. He started his career in technical support for Apple Computer in Austin, Texas. Alex is a registered Integromat partner and hosts a monthly tech talk where he and his guests discuss all things Integromat. Alex is the director at New Path Consulting, and you can check out his website at newpathconsulting.com. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, Andy. It's so nice to see you again. Thanks for having me on your.
Thanks for being on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, I want to start by you're working at Apple Computer and doing tech support. What was that like? And was that in the early days, like when you were working there, did you know that Apple was going to become the, monster company that it is today?
My computer experience started using an Apple IIe in 1984. So that's why I got my gray hair here. So I've been using computers for going on 40 years, right? Like a lot of nerds, especially Gen Xers, they have, some of them have experience with computers, and their math teachers, like the math teacher got an Apple and was so excited. Usually the math teacher, there was rarely a computer teacher. And so I had that, and that was Mr. Blanzy actually in fifth grade or sixth grade. No, it was 84. So I was 13. And he said, "Oh, you got to check this out. Help me set this up." So there's like 2 or 3 kids in our math class that stayed after school and kind of put this thing together. And I have to say, it was kind of one of these transformational experiences. Like I didn't know that I liked computers, but then I started playing with it, and it was like this instant light bulb turned on, and I was absolutely fascinated by everything it could do. So a year later, I saved up enough money. I worked as a bagger at a grocery store and bought my first Apple IIe with 128 kilobytes of RAM. 64 plus you had to get a 64 kilobyte extension. So a kilobyte, not megabyte or gigabyte, kilobyte. And so I started programming in BASIC and assembly language, and doing BBSs and logging in. And I always had this dream that maybe one day I could work at this company. And when I went to University of Michigan, we had a very large computer lab there. Apple was very high in, very active in higher education from the 70s and 80s. And in 1989, they, and just a few years before that, they built a very large computing facility. There's probably about 300 or 400 Macs in there, the largest computer lab I had ever seen with that many Apple computers.
That's a lot of Macs in one place for that early on. Yeah.
It was amazing. It was like when they did tours in Ann Arbor of the campus, that was one of the things they'd show parents. They're like, look at all the computers we have in this lab. It must have been maybe $1 million worth of computers. It's really amazing. So I did a lot of work at University of Michigan with Apples and Macs and support. And I actually did support when I was at school doing my computer science degree. And out of school, I was I was an intern in Cupertino. I worked on some software there, and so had a early in to them. And then when I graduated, I had one of the support reps for one of the sales reps said, "Hey, they just moved to Austin." This was 1992, 93. And they said, "They just moved to Austin. You should check out and see if there's an opportunity to work there." And so I applied, and I had some database expertise, and they needed people that did database development and SQL and in the support center. And so I started working there, and this was 1994, I believe. Yeah. Apple was, at the time, I didn't realize it, but they were, let's just say, not at the prime of their development. And I worked there until end of 96, December 96.
That's cool. Yeah, you were on the very early days of Apple, and I mean, that was, can't remember the year, but that was well before the iPod and the iPhone, where they kind of went to the personal small gadgets.
It was a huge transformation. I remember the month I was leaving, I was recruited to go work at an internet startup. That was really, I did a lot of work with them when I was at Apple. So I had like a relationship with this company in Mississauga, Ontario called Everywhere Development. And it was really interesting to see how they were still kind of thought Microsoft was this huge, enemy. And there was a lot of that inside the company. And they were kind of defocused from customers, to be perfectly honest with you, in my opinion. It was more of like, well, we need to gain market share against the Windows and Intel monopoly. And they did a lot of things like they wanted to license. I remember they were licensing the Mac finally to a company called Power Computing in Austin, Texas. And they thought, well, Power Computing is going to sell into low-end Macs. So they're going to have like the IBM PC, and Power Computing is like, well, our customers want the high-end Macs. We want even higher end. And Apple was like, well, we license this to you to actually do the low-end Macs. And they're like, well, we don't want to do the low-end Macs because there's no money in it. And there was just this kind of weird marketing stuff. They had like CEOs come in and left. And then Steve Jobs came back from Next the month after I left. And I remember going to a party where there's people were wearing like turtlenecks and jeans. It was like a cult. It was really interesting. And it was in Austin, so I don't think he was there or anything like that. But there were some Next employees, and nobody really knew what was going to happen because they thought the company was going to go out of business. There was a lot of articles being written that really they didn't have the means to actually move forward. And it really did take. I left, and of course still follow them very closely, but I made some amazing relationships and friendships that last to this day. They're just the most interesting people that I've ever worked with in my life there. It took them probably a good 4 or 5 years to kind of get a little bit of that whole personal computer thing and music and all that stuff. Because before that, it was not even close on the radar. The one thing that I do remember is we had a camera called the Quick Take, which was one of the first digital cameras I ever saw, that used 4 AA batteries, I believe. And you could take maybe 10 pictures before the batteries ran out, Duracell batteries. It would just drain the batteries. And then when you connected it to a serial port on your computer and your Mac, it would take maybe like 30 seconds to a minute to download one picture. And the picture was like 640 it's like a 640 by whatever picture. So maybe like a few thousand pixels. It's just a small picture comparatively speaking to what we have today. And, but people were really excited. I mean, it was like, wow, digital photography. It was, and then the Newton was the other thing that was really interesting. The first handheld, or one of the first handheld kind of handwriting recognition devices. So there was a lot of cool stuff. When I was there, there was a lot of neat new technologies that eventually turned into something commercializable. But when I was there, they're effectively commercial prototypes that were being sold on the market to very, very special kind of people.
Right. Kind of those early days of kind of figuring out the destination, which actually we may end up talking about later on in our show. So tell me about, okay, so that's kind of where you started. I mean, can't even begin to talk about the things that have changed in technology and the cloud since then, but tell me about your journey to where you are today. You're primarily using Wild Apricot and Integromat to serve your member-based organizations. Talk a little bit about where you're at now.
For people my age, I just turned 50 this year. Most of their journey in their careers is pretty winding. Like if you're in technology, I actually think of technology as kind of like the most similar to the entertainment industry in Hollywood, frankly, or the music industry. It very much values young, fresh, new ideas. And so the technologies and the people are almost always this ever cycling 20-year-olds that come into this industry and make the same mistakes that we did, frankly. And that's okay. I mean, that's what it is. So like I had starry eyes of like being a millionaire, right? Like, I'll be perfectly honest with you. Like, wow, this technology thing is amazing. Like we could do all kinds of great stuff with it. Look at all the ways it's going to change the world, right? Like when I was at Apple, people were, Steve Jobs talked about the bicycle for the mind. And so this idea of like using computers to change the world, really, right? Not just not to just compute, but like make a difference in the way our society functions. It takes a lot longer than I think people think. It's definitely happening more now than it did before. But back then, I always thought like that was what everyone did, but it was very much not the case. So I had this sort of realization that the computers were really a luxury item for the elite of the world. That's really what they were. I actually thought of it like, well, look, there's 300 Macs in this campus, but that may be one of 5 buildings like that in the world. And I didn't even realize at the time. Nobody really said anything about it. As I reflect backwards, I realized that I was very privileged actually to have access to those kind of technologies, because most people didn't. And to this day, most people don't. So my kind of career trajectory it seemed to be always around leveraging the things that I like to see, which is bringing technology to people that can't normally afford it or use it. And that happened when I was at the startups. I worked for a company that was as a database to web technology called Tango from Everywhere, which is kind of like a precursor to Cold Fusion or ASP.NET, these kind of database-driven systems. And then I worked for an email marketing company that was essentially MailChimp before MailChimp, that was in the late 90s during the dot-com boom. And again, it was really, I always thought, well, we have this email marketing solution that everybody could use it, but the reality is that not everybody could afford it. And only the largest companies could really afford sending email on the kind of bandwidth that was required to send 1 billion messages a month and track them. So I was kind of disappointed, honestly. I always thought this technology is not even being used by anyone that could really use it. Small organizations, small businesses, non-for-profits. And when I kind of got burned out, frankly. There's a lot of stuff that happened in my personal life too. But I kind of checked out of the rat race, the technology rat race, in 2001, roughly. And I was only like 30 years old then. And kind of got disenchanted because not all the dreams that I had that I thought would happen actually came true. And I kind of saw the reality of what technology I think was, and kind of to some extent is, which is this constant broadcasting of new ways of doing things, new fads, and that never changed. That's still today, crypto and all that stuff. It's just another line in many evolutions of the way that we interact with each other. I ended up kind of checking out, and I worked in the Ontario government as a public servant for almost 12 years. The guy who hired me, he said, we're lucky to have you, but I don't think you're going to stay here for more than a year. And I ended up, because I like the people, I stayed there for 12 years. And it was the first time I realized that it isn't really like what you're working on, it's who you're working with that makes a difference. I think it's really important. And as I get older, I mentor some younger people, and they said, well, should I work for this company? It's this really cool technology. I'm like, you know what? I've seen a lot of cool technology. I saw the Newton before. I saw an iPad, iPhone type device, well beyond anything. Like, I personally used it. I had it at home. Like, I had friends that used it. So it's the people that you work with, and that makes a difference. So if you like the people you're working with and you enjoy their company and you fit with them, whatever that may be, that's great. And so I like the people I worked with in the Ontario government. I really did. And I learned a lot about small businesses and organizations, and a lot about non-for-profits and about their challenges with using technology, which even to date in 2021, continue to be as difficult and challenging as they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so I like bringing that kind of technology to the world, to those organizations that normally can take advantage of them. And so Wild Apricot and Integromat to some extent are those platforms.
So tell me about Wild Apricot. First of all, like what is it? I mean, it's a platform I hadn't heard about, until I had met you and kind of learned about it. So kind of tell us about that and unpack that, and then we'll kind of jump into, how you use that with your clients.
Sure. So not-for-profits in general are organizations that don't have a lot of technology expertise, business or marketing expertise, but they want to change the world, right? Every not-for-profit that in the world has a mission, a mandate to transform society as we know it, to change inequities, to change perceptions, to change governments sometimes, to change political and economic structures. The people that run them are extremely idealistic, futuristic people, almost always, which is interesting because from a technology perspective, they're extremely backwards for the most part. So you'd think they'd be like very futuristic. And my opinion is that always happened because they simply, like I said earlier, that technology has been only for the elite. So if you have millions of dollars to spend on technology, you're going to get the best. But if you have thousands or hundreds of dollars to spend, you're not going to get anything at all. And that's still the case, frankly. I don't think actually that's changed that much. But what has changed is the cloud and the ability for organizations to the consumerized notion of technology that's now in your hands and part of your everyday lives. The expectations of non-for-profits have increased, their marketing departments, and so as a result, they've demanded cheaper, better products. And while the Apricot is a product that was built in Toronto, Canada, where I live, by a friend of mine, Dimitri Buterin, and he and I met probably 18, 19 years ago. And he asked me, I worked with a lot of non-for-profits and as a consultant at the time. And he said, like, what are their challenges? And kind of pricked my brain. I said, well, everything, basically, like setting up a website, online donations, event management, membership dues, all of the kind of things that a non-for-profit normally does. They do it on paper. They do it completely. This was 20 years ago, and it was very expensive. I worked on some projects to help organizations do online donations and electronic receipts with PDF files. And it was just like, it was so expensive. It's so complicated. And I was like, well, nobody can, even the small not-for-profit couldn't afford this kind of a platform. So I was telling him that, and then I think his thought process was on the same lines. So this company, while the Apricot evolved as a software as a service for small associations and organizations and clubs that needed a turnkey system that had a customer relationship management component, event management, a website system, kind of like, instead of using all these little components like MailChimp for email marketing and a website system for website, they would have it all in one highly integrated package. And he sold it at a price point that was 10 times less than the next competitor. It was just such an ambitious and such a good sort of public service, almost to some extent. And he was rewarded for it and while Apricot was rewarded, and they still are rewarded for it by having tens of thousands of customers all over the world that can pick up a product for free, start using it, and then deploy a completely automated system to manage their membership and market and deliver on the mandate of their organization by engaging their members and their audience. Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And that's kind of your agency's kind of core product. That's kind of the space you are in and helping those kinds of organizations.
Yeah, that actually took a little while. I started my consulting business in November of 2014, and it took me a good 2 to 3 years. I wish, honestly, while the Apricot already had been in the market for at least a decade by that point, but it took me another couple of years, and Dimitri actually, frankly, reaching out to me and saying, hey, like, our product is really good now, you should take a look at it. And then we became a partner in 2016 and have actively invested, very much focused on this very particular target base, which, as I understand it, in North America, there's about 1 million associations and clubs. So like an association would be like a dentist association of South Carolina, or a real estate brokers association of Atlanta, or those are just examples. Or in one case, like we work with a mechanical contractor association in British Columbia. So there's these are networks of people that are normally competitors in some cases, or they're clubs, sports clubs, hobbyists that are networks. They're social networks, effectively, with a common goal. And while the Apricot helps these social networks grow. And so I started being a partner. We brought some clients on, got really good at the software. And then as I work with clients in the space, I found very interesting people that have the same kind of thought process as I did, helping organizations grow, non-for-profits, and helping them take this technology that's normally only for the largest, most richest organizations and deploying it to tens of thousands of organizations and hopefully eventually millions that are building their own networks.
That's very cool. Very much needed product in that space. Sounds like really fit the right kind of niche. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about productizing automation. I know you and I have had this conversation multiple times, kind of an ongoing conversation about this that we've talked about frequently. And I think it's a bit of a hard thing to figure out. We talked a little bit about, the early days of Apple kind of finding their way. What's the right product and stuff. And I think in a lot of ways we could say, that's kind of where Integromat Partners and Integromat's at. Like this is such a new, powerful platform. What's kind of the way to do that? But what are your thoughts on creating resellable automation products and services?
Yeah, you're right, Andy. That's it's Integromat. When I started my business, I'll be honest with you, I haven't told many people this story, but when I started my business, in my mind, like I have a very kind of futuristic thought process in my head. I was like, what if this could happen? I actually, in my head, actually visualized a product like Integromat. Now, I didn't have the means or the capabilities to build something as amazing as what those guys have done, but I always thought like this API programming thing is really complicated. Like it's amazingly powerful. Integration capabilities are easier than ever before. Like the ability to connect systems together is just incredible from what it was in the 80s and 90s, where it was really a proprietary, almost like you shouldn't be able to do this. It's going to cost you a lot. This is completely democratized. This idea of platform, like integration platform as a service. So it's easier, right? It still takes some knowledge, and it's much easier than it was before. And it's much more sort of, what do you call it? Commoditized, but also accessible to people that don't have a lot of expertise, which is amazing. Like $9 a month for Integromat. It's just an incredible value for what it does. The best probably value I've seen in the last 20 years, frankly. Personally, I think it's more transformational than the smartphone. That's what I think. I don't know if people would share that. Probably they think I'm crazy, but I actually think it's completely transformational for the abilities or organizations to build stacks of software and like Lego blocks, and then make them do work together in a way that's never been able to be done before. Thing about it, though, is that with software, the sales, the business part of it, the technical part is incredible. Like there's just so much things to learn and there's just incredible innovations there. But the business stuff hasn't really changed, in my opinion, because software, unlike a widget or a car, software is sold by replicating the same copy of whatever it is, with the additional cost being next to nothing. So if you build a car, the next car that you build still has a fixed cost of those materials and to build. But the software, once you build it, the next million copies are free effectively. The only cost is the marketing and the sales of them, and then of course the maintenance of it. But it's a very different business model. But with automation, still, it's very much this particular kind of configuration. It's unique to each company. So you have to like build this automation uniquely for their purposes and maintain it. And it's not a highly scalable business model. So if you want to be really good at that, you could probably, you can become really good at it. And there's a lot of Integromat experts that we've met, both you and I, that have, they know hundreds of different apps. They know all the various different, and which is great. I personally think that's a very hard business model to scale to tens of thousands, millions of customers.
The idea that everything that comes in the door is custom and you've never built it before.
Essentially, or if you've built parts of it before, you still have to build a lot more. And right. and then on the customer side, to sell that, well, it's a time and materials exercise. You might be able to say, it's just like the car, right? So I'm going to build you a new quote unquote car or new, robot, I guess is the real analogy. And this robot is going to have some features, this software robot, but it's going to be maybe built from some parts that I already have, but maybe not. And maybe I have to make new parts. And so the client has to end up paying thousands, tens of thousands. Again, once again, the same theme. Well, what the client wants to pay $10. They want to pay $99 a year. They want a solution, but they're not willing to front the cost of the development so that you can sell it to somebody else for the same amount of money, right? And so a lot of customers now, with the way that they buy stuff in the App Store, and they don't, and then Integromat itself, well, they don't expect to pay thousands of dollars for the automation. They expect to pay tens of dollars. And so the only way to do that is to kind of create a very particular pain killer, a pain solver, and take the automation and develop into a product, meaning that the actual whole package of the automation is branded and packaged for a very particular audience who have a very consistent set of problems. And in our company, the way we've done that is we've identified the Wild Apricot product and its integration with an accounting system called QuickBooks, which is probably one of the most popular accounting systems in the world. And there is a huge pain point there of getting these systems to talk together. And so that's what we've done.
So kind of the idea, if I kind of restate it a different way, I think a lot of people, including myself, who do Integromat automation work, a new project comes in and maybe 10 or 20% of it is stuff I can reuse for something else. And then 80% is custom that I'm building one time for one customer, versus a solution where maybe 70 or 80% of it is the same for every customer. And then it's that last 20 or 30% to make it just fit their needs. So there's more reusable work rather than the bulk of it being custom work every time.
100%. And actually with a goal to eliminate that 20 or 30% to 0%, meaning that right. They use it the same exact way and configure it through a user interface, also hopefully built with no code. We haven't gotten there yet, but they use no code to build products. So no code is perceived to build automations and utilities and things like that. And my personal opinion is that and this, by the way, this no code thing is not new. Visual programming existed for a long time. This isn't really a new, again, I have this white hair. I've seen iterations. I work with a company that actually tried to create visual programming. Tango was a visual programming user interface. It still requires programming, but the thing about it is that it's always hard to build a product with this because it has an extraordinary amount of user interface innovation, and it has to be hosted and maintained. And I believe actually for the first time in technology, I believe now there's enough technological components to build actual reusable products that are resaleable without actually writing that much code. The infrastructures are abstracted, and all of this capability is abstracted away to where you could actually build some really new. And I believe, for example, you could probably build a Facebook type product with no code today. You could now, whether you can make it as popular as Facebook, that's a different story. But that's where we've gotten to, and so now it's a question of making those right decisions, and then as always, getting the audience to know that you're there and buy from you and scale it so that the business part makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I always think of no code being new too, but I guess really, and I'm kind of thinking on the fly here, what's new about it is the economical, how economical it's become and the access to it and the ease of building. I guess that's the part that's maybe new, not no code tools in and of themselves. The underlying economy of the API economy of connecting these tools that already exist, like a Dropbox, Airtable, Wild Apricot, these Lego pieces that are very powerful in and of themselves, and levering them to do things. And in some ways, kind of they're running in the background, and then you're providing a kind of a service that is new, because like I said earlier, the integration capabilities between products has always been a high value add custom consulting service. It's almost been, in some cases, it's the way that consulting companies made money. They actually did this integration work, and because it was so hard to do.
So when that is much easier to do, what is actually left? Well, for a consultant, it's not integration work. I mean, I don't think it is. It's actually finding those common gaps that exist in use cases of products, and servicing for the right target market. And so the productizing a solution requires knowledge of some subject matter expertise of your underlying customer base to a very, very deep degree. This is hard to do because, sometimes people that's why I'm focusing on this space, the non-for-profit association space, because once you do that and you understand their pain points, you could then start to take out these automation examples that say, this problem is shared between, a million other organizations, and we can easily sell that. It's much easier to sell that than saying, well, what kind of automation problem do you have? And they're like, well, we have all kinds of automation problems. Can you build those for $10? And it's like, well, no, we can't. I
always kind of refer to Integromat as a gap filler. So you have these products, you have MailChimp, and you have QuickBooks, and you have Monday, and you have all these different things which solve a problem, but then you have all these disparate systems that are not connected that creates a new problem. And so Integromat kind of fills that gap. So I think what we're talking about here is finding those gaps that lots of people have, and then building that solution that you can resell to fill those gaps over and over again.
I like metaphors. My favorite metaphor for products like Integromat and Zapier and all these other ones is their plumbing, actually. So automation experts are actually plumbers. We're literally finding the fittings and the right materials to create the data pipelines between these things. And so that when you turn the water on, the data, there's no leaks. It just runs, and nobody even thinks about it. A lot of people don't think about the plumbing in their house. If there's a problem, it's a big problem. But normally it just runs, and it just, like electricity too, it just functions. And so these products, I consider them that way. But the interesting thing about plumbers is that there are plumbers that do commercial plumbing, and there are plumbers that specialize in installing the plumbing, and ones that are in fixing the plumbers. And if you think about plumbing as the sort of trade, there's kitchens and bathrooms and all these specialized use cases, and the people actually build those particular things, and they're really good at the way that those work. And general plumbers are actually really good at it, but the real plumbers that do really well, I think, are the ones that have a very specialization. They fix really difficult sewer problems, for example. And I think that's the same. I think to some extent it's the same here.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me about, all right, you have a QuickBooks for Apricot, Wild Apricot, productized automation service, I think is what it is. Tell me about that. And tell me about that product. And then are you working on any others that you've identified?
So let's go back to the business need, the pain. In an association, you've got an executive director, person that's the leader, the CEO, quote unquote, of this organization, and they need data to make decisions about how to grow, to modify, to evolve, to serve the needs of their members better. And one of the biggest pieces of data is their financials. So any board meeting of any company of any size, they primarily are talking about the financials of the company. And then the strategies to kind of work those, especially if it's a for-profit. Not-for-profits also, they don't focus as much on the financials because there's no profit. So there may be a surplus, or there should be, but there's no profit. And so when they talk financials, they're like, well, our company has this assets, these liabilities, here's our balance sheet, here's where our cash flow is, and we want to invest in this. We need a grant here or something like that. And they need to understand what is happening in terms of are they making enough money to continue to hire the people and to deliver on their mandate. A lot of not-for-profits always have this challenge of 10% admin fee. So only 10% of the admin should be of the administrative should be for the operation of the organization. That's rarely the case. 10% is an incredible target. It's usually closer to 40, 50. So a lot of donors will say, well, I'm giving you $100 and 50 of that goes to staff. I want 90 of that to go to the actual mission of what you're doing. So you want to reduce that operational. And when you have an accountant that's sitting there and saying, I need data to do that, those accountants are usually very expensive resources. And so with small associations, you have volunteer accountants, and you have people that are are doing this literally out of the goodness of their heart. They normally get paid hundreds of dollars an hour to do this accounting work. And so as a result, they don't really, what I would call, do a great job of the books for these organizations. One of the pains I heard was an executive director saying, I want to know if our event has broke even last year, or for the last 5 years. Did the event that we run actually generate a surplus so that we can use it for other things? Or is the fundraiser literally, we ran the event and the amount of money spent to run it is exactly even, which means it paid for the event. It was like a big party, basically. And a lot of people outside of not-for-profits kind of have this deep feeling that these are like boondoggles, right? These events are not really doing what they do. And I'll be honest with you, I've seen the books. It's true for a lot of them. The reason why, though, one of the reasons why it's true is because the accountants never really can provide enough granularity to the executive director to say, this event with these expenses actually did this without too much work. And so they don't want to do a lot of work. They want it to be automated. Accountants love automation. And so what we decided is to look at that problem. And we had a client that had an executive director that wanted to break even on events. They wanted to say, okay, here's an event, here's our expenses. And in Wild Apricot, they have all the account receivables. So all the money coming in, the invoices and payments, but none of the expenses. QuickBooks has the full picture. So how do you get data for account receivables to go into QuickBooks in a way that matches the account structure of these QuickBooks systems? And if you see some of these QuickBooks systems, sometimes they'll have one chart of accounts, all the money, like there's no granularity, or they'll have events and memberships. Well, that's great if they have those broken out, or they'll have a chart of account just for a particular event that happens every year. And to get those to map from Wild Apricot invoices into QuickBooks without too much Excel munging, without too much ongoing management of data, you need a transformation module. You need a system to transform this invoice payment data, which is highly structured, available in an API through Wild Apricot, into QuickBooks. And in some organizations, they use QuickBooks Online. So they want this to happen without any files. They just want it to happen over the internet, this is what we're talking about, right? You have a QuickBooks system that's sitting in one place, a huge set of Lego blocks. You have Wild Apricot, and these systems just communicate with each other. And at the end of the day, as an accountant, you see all this data flowing as if by magic, the water, as I described. And then you can run a report and say, this event broke even or not. And you can do that as the event is running if you want. That kind of integration actually in QuickBooks and Intuit land, there's always been these kind of products out there. But we think we're one of the first that actually is using the API systems to flow data between two systems. And what's interesting is that this problem exists in a lot of CRM to accounting systems. So you can take Wild Apricot out of the picture and replace it with Salesforce. And then you can take QuickBooks out of the picture and replace it with Sage or a whole bunch of NetSuite, a whole bunch of other accounting systems. And that business problem still exists for those. And it goes from the tiniest organization to the largest Fortune 100 companies.
Right. Yeah, I have found over the last few months, I've talked to a couple of people at really huge businesses and talk about their problems and stuff. And I'm like, it sounds a lot like the problems my, 10 employee companies that I help have, I've been amazed at how not so different the problems are based on business size.
The problems of a business is that there's silos in the operational structures, marketing, R&D, operations, support, finance. They're all run as these little data silos. And so there needs to be the plumbing in those organizations at the smallest end all the way to the largest end. The largest organizations have better plumbing, I would say. I mean, they have better faucets and sinks and kitchens, but in many cases, the data still doesn't flow very effectively. Or if it flows, it always has a human aspect to it that requires an enormous amount of constant care and feeding. And the real problem is that in some cases, that constant care and feeding turns bad, and some of that data becomes corrupted, right, whether it be by accident or on purpose.
Right. And a lot of times breaking down those silos, and the bigger the organization, the harder it is to break the silos between
This is like
systems.
in most larger companies, that's like the mantra is like, let's break the silos between these organizations. Those silos are, of course, people silos, right? They're to communicate, but actually, once the people silos even are happening, I mean, in the 1940s and 50s, there was typewriters. And so that was the only silos. It's just people communicating to get the job done. But as technology happens and you have a whole technology kind of mirror of the reflection of the cultures of these various silos, this API thing really breaks those down. And I mean, it could, right? If you choose for them to do so, you have to choose to do that. And
right.
that innovation, I think, is definitely one of the most interesting things I've seen in technology. Although I think the average person would probably not really get that. I don't think they'd be like, well, my iPhone is still this incredible thing. But I'm like, yeah, but this iPhone is communicating seamlessly to hundreds of data silos all the time. And that's why it's so powerful. It isn't because it's this screen with a touch thing. It's actually because of the APIs and everything that's running inside of it is the magic. And I think a lot of people kind of take that for granted. I know you and I don't, but
yeah. So tell me, as we kind of wrap up our time here together, tell me about New Path Consulting, the services and products you offer. You know, if somebody's watching is like, hey, I think maybe I want Alex to help our organization. Talk to that person right now.
Sure. Well, if you're an association or your club, if you have people that pay you a certain amount of money every month to do something, to offer some kind of value, and you're a member of this club, and in some ways, like I said, if you're part of a social network of some sort, then and you struggle with lots of different systems, paper, spreadsheets, legacy systems that a volunteer built 15 years ago and they moved to Costa Rica. That happened to one of our clients. And they just left you with something that you don't know how it works or operates. You should take a look at Wild Apricot, which is a really good, affordable solution to your data problem and your organizational management problems. And then our company, we specialize in understanding all of the various pain points these kind of organizations have. So we're talking organizations between 1 and 10 employees. They're small associations. They're probably under $5 million in revenue. And our company, we have 9 people in our company, and we are the number 1 Wild Apricot partner in the world. So we know enough about the challenges these organizations face to bring them very affordable consulting solutions. And in some cases, in the last few years, we've invested in these products. So the QuickBooks product for integration with Wild Apricot is one of them that uses Integromat. And then another one, which is a very recent innovation, is our WordPress plugin. So being able to front end your database for Wild Apricot with a WordPress site, so you can single sign on into your account with your WordPress Wild Apricot credentials, and then set access control on pages and content in WordPress. And then more importantly, adding functionality in your WordPress site to even add more value to your members beyond what Wild Apricot does out of the box, and being able to kind of create a beautiful mobile responsive website that has features like job boards, communities, and all kinds of other things that are expected by members in the 21st century. I say that because a lot of these sites look like they were built in the 20th century.
Yeah. So basically, I think that's cool because you're bringing like enterprise level features to an organization that would never be able to afford those kind of things by combining those Wild Apricot features into their WordPress site. I think that's very cool.
That's a good point, Andy. Like that's totally true. Yeah. And we're trying to do it in a way that's affordable. And in some cases, it takes the organization to kind of level up a little bit. They may need to find a volunteer that can help them maintain and or maybe find some new budgets in areas where they've never allocated, like basically a marketing / technological budget that they've never done before. But it's time, like it's especially post-COVID, it's all these organizations are realizing very quickly that they need a digital footprint that's as good as their offline footprint, if not better. And so it's been really incredible. So a couple of years here as we were watching this unfold in front of us.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, any final thoughts before we end our time? This has been really cool, but I'd love to get anything else you want to say.
I want to thank you for doing this and featuring people like myself in the context of what we're doing and trying to make this technological stuff come alive with people, because you heard what I said. Like, I think it's really important, and the Integromat community, I think, is one of the most interesting, diverse set of individuals I've ever worked with in technology. So it's pretty cool, and so thank you for that, Andy.
Yep, my pleasure. I kind of saw this idea in another context and thought, I got a lot of people that maybe they just like to talk, and let's record it and let other people watch it. So, and the response has been really, really positive so far. So it's been fun, and I appreciate you joining me. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for being on, and learned a lot from you today.
Great. Have a great day.
All right. See you soon.